The first thing that returns is the silence, the kind that settles over a place abandoned by memory. A dim coastal house, shutters half broken, air thick with dust that has learned to stay still. Time feels locked here, like the world outside forgot this room existed. Light pushes through the warped blinds in thin, tired stripes, and the floor retains the faint, stubborn trace of something long cleaned but never erased. In those first 100 words of reentry, suspension hangs everywhere, pressing itself into the stale air and the investigator's lungs. The crime scene, though decades old, feels almost awake. He steps inside without announcement, without ceremony. The door groans behind him, a reminder of how long this place has waited. This room, this corridor of quiet, once held the last moments of Lira May Holleran, aged 28, a part-time painter who spent her early years drifting between states before settling in this beach town seeking steadiness. Her friends remembered her as precise, gentle, and strangely private. Her last known movements traced her returning home from a late evening shift at a small gallery near the boardwalk. That night, she walked alone. She didn't make it to the next morning. The original scene file noted minimal disruption. No sign of forced entry, no sounds reported by neighbors, no visible struggle beyond a toppled chair and a shattered frame containing one of her own paintings. Lira had been found in the narrow hallway between her kitchen and bedroom. She had no family nearby, no ongoing disputes, no debts the investigators could confirm. The case grew cold before winter of that same year, quietly stored in a forgotten departmental drawer. The investigator, Evan Rourke, had been young then, too young, he still thinks. He remembers stepping across this threshold for the first time 2 decades earlier, filled with the wrong kind of confidence. He had moved too fast, cataloged too quickly connected pieces that did not belong together. That mistake lived with him. And now, standing inside this abandoned structure, he exhales slowly, treating every object as if it might break into dust. His flashlight beam crawls along surfaces that have settled under years of neglect. Each angle exposes shadows shaped like absent answers. The smell of old varnish clings to the walls, and the wooden floor beneath him murmurs with each cautious step. A faint draft leaks from somewhere unseen, carrying a hint of salt from the nearby shore. The house seems smaller than he remembers, as if the years compressed it. He pauses beside the spot where Lira's body had been found. A faint discoloration remains beneath the faded carpet edge. Back then, he had knelt here, gloves new and stiff, thinking the truth would cooperate if he only pressed hard enough. It had not. Now older, slower, he feels the weight of that early miscalculation settle across his shoulders. A canvas leans against the wall, one of Lira's unfinished pieces. Odd, he doesn't remember it being here the first time. He crouches, brushes away a thin sheet of dust. The painting is muted, nearly monochrome, an abstract configuration of long vertical strokes. They resemble rain, or curtains, or bars. He can't be sure. The signature is incomplete, as if she stopped mid-stroke. His gloved fingers tap once against the wooden frame. A hollow sound. He listens. He taps again. Another hollow response. In the stillness of the room, even small sounds feel like disruptions. He pries open the backside gently. Inside the frame, something thin, folded, protected between canvas and board, a photograph. He lifts it carefully into the watery light. A single image, Lira standing beside an unidentified figure at the beach, late afternoon sun behind them. The person next to her is partially out of frame, only a hint of shoulder, the start of an arm. She appears to be laughing, head turned slightly away from the camera. Someone took this candidly. Someone close enough to her to capture this moment, close enough to hide from view. He places the photograph in a protective sleeve, breath steady but slowed. This was never logged in the original evidence list. This was never found. The quiet inside the house turns sharper. He murmurs to himself, barely a whisper, "How did I miss you?" The old scene feels suddenly less dormant. And the unsolved case, once sealed by time, begins to shift. 2. Case reopens due to discovery of new crucial evidence. The precinct had not changed much since the 70s. Same narrow hallways, same faint smell of old paper warmed by fluorescent lights, though new faces had come and gone. The lobby buzzed with routine. Radio chatter, the hum of outdated machines, distant printers clattering. Evan stepped through with the photograph sealed inside an envelope, its weight disproportionate to its size. He walked straight to the archive room, where cold files slept in metal cabinets. The air here always felt slightly cooler, as if unspoken history created its own draft. The shelves held cases that had outlived their investigators, outlived their suspects, sometimes outlived their truths. Lira's case had rested here for decades, its corners softened by time. He removed the box and set it on the table. Dust lifted into the narrow beam of overhead light, drifting like faint reminders. He opened the lid, revealing the original envelopes, catalog reports, scene diagrams, witness summaries. He remembered most of them, though the details felt remote, like someone else's work. He slid the photograph beside the early documentation. It contrasted sharply with the stale paper, a small insertion capable of reordering the entire case. He reviewed the old records. No mention of beach shots, no collection of personal effects that resembled this. That meant the image had been intentionally hidden, maybe by Lira, maybe by someone else. A knock interrupted the silence, a hesitant, soft rap of knuckles against metal. "Rourke," a young officer peeked in. "You needed the original property tag logs." "Yeah," Evan replied, voice low. "Set them there." The officer nodded and departed. Evan returned to the carefully spread papers. He studied the date noted on the back of the photograph, August 12, 1979. Lira's death occurred 6 weeks later. The timeline stretched, creating a space where new questions could settle. Her gallery shifts, her neighbors' statements, her movements during those weeks, all once considered irrelevant because they lacked conflict. Now the image offered an unknown connection, and connections alter everything. He stared at the obscured figure, the cropped shoulder, the slight tilt inward as if the person were leaning toward her. If the photographer stood close, then someone else stood closer. He pulled up old witness records. Most were routine. A neighbor who heard nothing unusual that night. A friend from the gallery who described Lira as quiet but steady. A delivery driver who remembered her collecting packages without conversation. No mention of close companionship. No mention of someone who might linger at a beach with her. He jotted notes methodically, the scratch of pen faint but firm. Photograph hidden, unidentified companion, August 12, candor, comfort. The realization grew quietly. Someone close to Lira existed outside the documented circle. The chill in the room deepened as he retrieved the evidence logs. The records showed one painting collected as part of the original scene, but the painting retrieved today, leaning in the corner, wasn't on the list. Someone had placed it back after the investigation closed, or someone removed it before cataloging, only to return later. He felt the first pulse of something familiar, the slow ignition of renewed inquiry. Evan carried the box and the photograph into the briefing room. The glass wall reflected his tired expression, the gray at his temples, the steady but worn eyes. The case board stood empty. He pinned the photograph in the center. "Case 79H, he muttered, officially reopened. The mechanical hum of the building continued as if nothing had changed. But for the first time in decades, The silence surrounding Lira Holleran shifted, no longer sealed but stirred. The new piece of evidence, small, almost fragile, pressed open a door that had stayed shut for too long. 3 investigator examines, past reports to identify overlooked details. The next morning arrived pale and subdued, clouds mooting the Florida heat. Evan sat at his desk surrounded by stacks of files, their corners curled from age. The soft shuffle of turning paper filled the room, a dry, rhythmic sound that felt almost like breathing. He sifted through the earliest documents first. Initial scene photographs, property receipts, fingerprint logs, each artifact a piece of what he once believed was a straightforward case. Now they appeared incomplete. He began with the original timeline. Lira returned home around 9:30 p.m., according to a neighbor who saw her lights turn on shortly afterward. By 11:00 p.m., those same lights went off. She was found the next morning by a colleague who stopped by after she missed her gallery opening shift. The narrow window between 9:30 and 11:00 had framed the investigation's limits. He examined the location maps again, drawing slow lines across the page. The house's back door led to a sand pathway behind the property, something he had dismissed as irrelevant at 26. Now, that path seemed more significant. The sand could have muffled steps. The lack of rain that week meant impressions might have survived long enough for someone to notice. But the original notes showed no mention of back path analysis. A missed opportunity. He cataloged these oversights one by one, marking them with red tabs. Old interview transcripts followed. The gallery manager described Lira as punctual but reserved, often leaving straight after closing to walk home along the shoreline. A pattern, predictable, perhaps too predictable. Someone could have learned her routine with minimal effort. He flipped through a report from a nearby cafe where she occasionally sketched. The owner, a middle-aged man with a soft voice, recalled seeing her 3 days before her death. She had been drawing a series of parallel vertical shapes, similar to the strokes in the recovered painting. He had asked what they represented, and she answered with a faint smile, still figuring it out. He didn't press. Evan frowned. The pattern mattered. Lira's style, her choices, her habits, they all converged on that recurring shape. Bars, curtains, rain, or something hidden. He retrieved the painting taken from her house. He placed it beside the transcripts, comparing the strokes to her description. The rhythm of those lines held something deliberate. Each stroke nearly identical, distance measured as if aligning with something unseen. He lifted the canvas again, hollow. He thought back to the photograph hidden inside. He examined it again under magnification. The shadow positioning suggested late afternoon. The shirt fabric of the cropped figure, light, structured, maybe uniform adjacent. He zoomed in on the edge of their shoulder. A faint patch of stitching. A rectangular outline, possibly a name tag or an ID badge. He wrote this down carefully. A fragment, a detail overlooked for decades, but small details once paired form openings. He turned to the original officer list on the scene. One name caught his eye, not because of wrongdoing but because of proximity. An auxiliary beach patrol officer had arrived early, unofficially, before the main team. He had lived near Lira's walking route. His involvement had been minimal, but the proximity raised a quiet thought. Evan flagged it not as guilt, but as pattern. He continued flipping until a statement stopped him. A neighbor had mentioned seeing a man near Lira's porch the week before her death. The neighbor described him as comfortable there, as if he belonged. The detail was dismissed then, possibly a delivery worker or acquaintance. But the description matched the shoulder posture in the photograph. He reread the line twice. Comfortable. This wasn't random. He leaned back, inhaling the dry scent of aging pages. The air tasted like memory, stale, unspoken. He gathered all marked pages into a single stack. Each overlooked detail formed a subtle grid, connecting places where logic once failed. The new photograph forced everything into alignment. A soft knock again. "Rourke," the young officer said, "coffee." Evan nodded, "Thanks." The officer left without further conversation. Evan sipped slowly, eyes fixed on the board. His mind traced patterns that stretched across years. Lira's routines, the hidden painting, the beach photograph, the unknown figure, each piece settling into place with precision, not coincidence. He whispered to the room, "What were you trying to show us, Lira?" The silence didn't answer, but something within it began to take shape. The board grew crowded by noon, photographs, documents, note fragments pinned into a constellation of uncertainty. Evan stood before it with the slow, analytical patience that age had given him. Patterns emerged not through force but through observation. He traced the threads with his eyes, letting associations rise gradually, like shapes forming in fog. The reopening of the case had stirred old memories in town. People aged, businesses changed, but certain names still held quiet significance. By early afternoon, he had assembled an initial list of potential suspects, individuals once dismissed due to lack of physical evidence, now reconsidered in the renewed context. He began with Calder Rusk, a maintenance worker at the gallery where Lira exhibited. Calder had been in his 30s then, known for odd hours and a tendency toward isolation. Colleagues described him as polite but distant. He rarely interacted with Lira beyond routine tasks, though one witness had claimed he lingered near her workspace a few times, watching her mix pigments with steady concentration. His alibi on the night of her death was a shift at a storage facility located 10 miles away. Time-stamped logs supported this, though Evan now considered how easily such logs could be manipulated. Calder's motive was unclear, admiration perhaps, or something quieter, more complicated. But unclear did not mean impossible. Next was Marla Hendren, the gallery co-manager and one of Lira's few acquaintances. Their relationship was described as professional, occasionally friendly. Marla had a reputation for ambition, and there were subtle tensions over exhibition placements. Nothing explicit, nothing documented, just undercurrents. On the night of the murder, Marla reported being with her sister 2 towns over. Her alibi aligned with phone records. Still, Evan marked her file with a yellow tag, rather than clearing it outright. A third name emerged, Thomas Bryn, a local cafe regular who often observed Lira sketch from a distance. He had once tried to converse with her, though unsuccessfully, according to the cafe owner. He lived near the shoreline, not far from Lira's walking route. At the time, Thomas had been questioned briefly but dismissed due to lack of connection. Now, with the photograph revealing a close companion unknown to investigators, Thomas's presence on the beach took on new implications. Evan noted their names in thin, deliberate handwriting on the board. Each one represented a possible thread. But the fragment that disturbed him most was a name rarely mentioned in the original reports: Officer Grady Lorne, the auxiliary beach patrol officer who arrived early at the crime scene back in 1979. His initial involvement had been peripheral, logged as a helpful presence. He lived 3 blocks from Lira's home, often passed her path during evening patrols, and was known to speak with residents casually. His alibi was the one detail Evan revisited repeatedly. Grady claimed he had been off-duty that night, home by 8 o'clock. 2 neighbors corroborated seeing him earlier in the evening, though not during the critical window between 9:30 and 11:00. No one had accounted for that time period. It had seemed unimportant then. But now, with the photograph showing an arm that could belong to someone in a uniform, an ID badge partially visible. Evan couldn't ignore the possibility. He added Grady to the suspect list, marking him with a red circle. As he assembled these threads, he felt the gravity of time weigh down on him. Years of distance that softened facts, blurred lines, erased memories. Every alibi became less reliable with age, every motive more indistinct. He conducted short, cautious interviews with the surviving individuals. Not accusations, just inquiries. Calder Rusk answered the door of his small coastal apartment with a stiff nod. His voice was calm, almost too calm. When asked about Lira, he paused before admitting, she painted like she didn't want the world to look at her. His statements were simple, clean. His eyes carried no visible tension, but Evan had learned long ago that absence of tension meant nothing. Marla Hendren met him at her office, surrounded by art pieces she curated. She sighed when he mentioned Lira's name. We weren't close, she said, but she had presence, quiet presence. The words felt rehearsed, though lightly so. Evan observed her hands. It's often the hands that betray discomfort. Hers trembled slightly. Thomas Bryn appeared startled when Evan approached him outside the cafe. His voice was soft, fragmented by long pauses. I saw her draw sometimes, he said. She kept to herself. Didn't let people in. His eyes darted toward the shoreline as if expecting her to emerge from the waves. Finally, when Evan found Grady Lorne, now retired, the air around the man felt heavier. Grady welcomed him into a modest home, offering a seat. His manner was controlled, expressions guarded. When Evan mentioned the photograph, Grady's reaction was slow, measured. Hard to remember details from that long ago, he said quietly. Evan nodded but logged the hesitation, slight but definite. Back at the precinct, the board filled with voices that could no longer speak for themselves. Each suspect carried their own orbit of secrets, contradictions, histories that might intersect with Lira's in ways long obscured. But Evan understood something vital. Only one of them existed near her consistently, unseen in plain sight. The room dimmed as the sun lowered behind the glass windows, forming elongated patterns on the floor. He stared at the board one last time before shutting the lights. The quiet intensified as the building settled into evening. There were suspects, motives, alibis. But logic whispered that one of these paths held the truth. And truth rarely hides in the most obvious place. 5 clues emerged slowly, linking inconsistencies to emotional conflicts. The next days unfolded with deliberate slowness. Evan worked through each suspect's background, methodically evaluating their proximity, actions, and emotional currents surrounding Lira. The process felt almost surgical, cold, detailed, cautious. He kept his own voice minimal, both spoken and internal, focusing on what the evidence attempted to communicate. He began with patterns in Lira's artwork. The vertical strokes appeared repeatedly across multiple pieces. He laid photographs of her works on the table, creating a visual timeline. Earlier paintings lacked the parallel formation. Later ones emphasized them heavily. The shift occurred roughly 6 months before her death. Art can reveal conflict, he thought, not always literal but emotional. He scanned interview notes again. The gallery manager once described Lira's late-phase paintings as constrained, as if something confined her. Those lines, bars, curtains, rain, they symbolized separation, a barrier, a shadow between her and the world. Evan scribbled one word beneath the images: distance. The next clues surfaced in the phone logs cataloged from the original investigation. One call stood out, an unanswered attempt from an unlisted number 3 days before Lira died. The call appeared only once. No return attempt, no message, no follow-up. Unusual. He traced what little he could. The number belonged to a payphone near the boardwalk. Payphones recorded no identity, but their placement offered context. Anyone familiar with the area could have used it. He marked this as a floating clue, one needing connection. Another inconsistency emerged when comparing witness accounts from that week. Two neighbors described seeing Lira speaking softly to a man outside her home at dusk. Both described him as calm and self-assured, as if he belonged near her residence. But both also claimed they never saw him again after that week. This detail returned Evan to the photograph. The familiar proximity between Lira and the cropped figure, the comfort in posture, the relaxed positioning, it matched the neighbor's descriptions. Someone emotionally connected to her in a way she kept private. He returned to Grady Lorne's file. The more he examined it, the more its subtle gaps bothered him. Grady walked the shoreline regularly. He had casual rapport with residents. He wore a uniform with a shoulder patch that, at certain angles, resembled the faint stitching in the photograph. But emotional conflict, central to motive, required more than proximity. Evan dug deeper into records. He found a buried statement written by a patrol supervisor in September 1979. It noted that Grady had requested a scheduled shift weeks before Lira's death. No reason stated. The shift aligned with the time frame in which Lira's artwork grew increasingly constrained. Coincidence? Possibly, but coincidence rarely aligned this precisely. The next clue came from analyzing Lira's final month of gallery logs. She had taken several unscheduled afternoons off, uncharacteristic for her. Her colleagues recalled her appearing tense, though still quiet. When asked if anything was wrong, she replied only, "Just trying to breathe." The phrase struck Evan. Trying to breathe implied pressure, something closing in. He returned to Thomas Brin's statements. His behavior seemed rooted in admiration, possibly infatuation, but lacked aggression. Marla's motives pointed toward professional rivalry, yet her alibi felt structurally sound. Calder Rusk remained a viable thread but carried little personal emotional entanglement. Only one individual connected consistently through emotional overlap and spatial proximity: Grady. But one clue in isolation means little. Evan needed a sequence. He reviewed the property logs again. The painting with the hollow frame, where the photograph was found, had been originally cataloged as removed for preservation, but its return date was never logged. A clerical oversight, perhaps, but suspicious. Someone had access long after the case closed. He checked who had clearance to the archive at that time. Grady served as an informal liaison for a year after the investigation ended. He occasionally transported files, assisted in reorganizing old records. His name appeared several times in access logs, each entry unremarkable yet now increasingly relevant. Evan felt a subtle tightening in his chest, not emotion but alignment, logic forming its own quiet path. He sat for a long moment, processing. Pieces converged, the emotional distance in Lira's artwork, the secret companionship shown in the photograph, the neighbor accounts, the payphone call, the archival inconsistencies. These were not isolated clues. They were signals of a conflict, one growing silently beneath the surface of a peaceful beach town. A conflict involving someone accustomed to presence, accustomed to trust, accustomed to quiet control. The sun neared the horizon outside the window, washing the precinct in fatting amber. The light caught the photograph pinned to the board, casting thin horizontal lines across Lira's smiling face, lines resembling the strokes she painted so often. Evan stared at the alignment for a long time. This case wasn't about chaos. It wasn't about impulse. It was about restraint. And restraint carried weight. 6. Unexpected twist reveals the least suspected person as killer. The twist did not arrive with noise. It came through careful reading, an unnoticed statement buried deep within the archive, handwritten, unsigned, nearly discarded due to fading ink. Evan found it while cross-referencing property tags. The page slipped from between two unrelated files as he lifted them. He unfolded it gently. The paper felt brittle, edges yellowed. The statement contained only a few lines. Saw the officer speak with her near the dune path. She looked uneasy. He said it was nothing. There was no date, no signature, but the context placed the scene near Lira's home during the final week of her life. Evan closed his eyes briefly. His breath steadied, slow and intentional. He reread the statement 3 times. The officer. Not a stranger, not a coworker, not a gallery rival. An officer. Someone the town trusted, someone with consistent presence along the beach, someone who knew everyone's routines, someone who could approach without suspicion, someone least suspected because of uniform, duty, respect. His hand moved instinctively to the earlier notes. Grady Lorne's schedule shift, the payphone call, the partial uniform in the photograph, the neighbor sightings, the archival access, the early arrival at the crime scene. But there was one more missing piece, the motive's logical foundation. He found it in an overlooked personnel file from 1979, a disciplinary report, minor, concerning boundary concerns with local residents during off-duty hours. Nothing severe enough for suspension, but enough to mark a pattern of overfamiliar behavior. The report listed one resident, Lira Holleran. Evan felt the room narrow around him, not emotionally, but with the compression of truth. Everything aligned cleanly, devastatingly. He pulled out the recovered photograph again, this time analyzing the lighting angle. The cropped figure's stance suggested comfort, but Lira's posture, slightly withdrawn, indicated subtle tension. He had missed this earlier. The twist crystallized. Lira had tried to create distance, through her paintings, through behavior, through silence. Grady tried to close that distance. The conflict intensified. The night she died, he confronted her, likely near her home, near the dune path neighbors mentioned. A conversation grew tense. Something happened, not explosive, controlled. A quiet act unrecorded in sound or sight. Then an officer arrived early to the scene, calm, helpful, with no sign of alarm. A uniform granted him invisibility. Decades later, he who seemed least suspicious, trustworthy, steady, familiar, became the center of logical truth. Evan sat in silence, absorbing it. No triumph, no satisfaction, only precision. He wrote the final connection on the board. Grady Lorne, opportunity, proximity, pattern, concealment. The twist was not dramatic. It was controlled, hidden behind routine. And in the end, the least suspected person, because suspicion never pointed toward structure or authority, revealed himself through logic alone. The interview room was quiet, not tense, not dramatic, just quiet in the way a long-faded truth finally reaches the surface. Evening shadows stretched across the table, forming thin lines between Evan and the man seated opposite him. Grady Lorne sat with hands folded, posture steady, gaze almost serene. He had aged gently, hair thinning, manner softened by years lived in unassuming patterns. Nothing in his appearance hinted at darkness or conflict. That was the nature of truth sometimes. It lingered behind unremarkable faces. Evan placed a folder on the table, not forcefully but with deliberate care. He opened it slowly, letting the rustle of paper fill the space. A photograph, a copied neighbor statement, a personnel note, access logs. He didn't accuse. He didn't raise his voice. He simply arranged the documents in a line, each one placed with calm authority. Grady looked down, blinked once. No denial, no protest, just a long exhale that carried years of something unspoken. Evan maintained his stillness. "Thought you'd like to see what we found," he said, voice low, unthreatening. Grady's eyes drifted to the photograph, the one hidden inside Lira's painting. His gaze lingered on the faint outline of his own shoulder, nearly invisible, almost anonymous. "I didn't know that picture still existed," he murmured. A pause, a quiet acknowledgement. Evan watched him carefully. There was no triumph in uncovering truth, not in cases like this, where revelation carried more silence than closure. Grady's voice returned faint. "She didn't fear me, not at first." Evan said nothing. The retired officer continued in fragments. "I walked the shoreline most nights. She'd come by with her sketchbook, quiet girl, kind. She always nodded, sometimes smiled." He paused. "I thought that meant something." Evan listened, not interrupting, letting each word fall where it needed to. "She started avoiding me later," Grady said. "Didn't stop to talk, didn't look up, kept her distance." His fingers curled slightly. "Made me feel like I'd done something wrong. I didn't understand why." Silence filled the room, cold and steady. Grady's gaze drifted to the table. "Went by her house that week. Wanted to ask if I'd upset her. She seemed uneasy, asked me to leave." His voice trembled faintly. "I shouldn't have gone back." Evan's jaw tightened at the last line, not emotionally, but because the logic aligned completely. The story didn't need embellishment. It didn't need dramatization. Truth, when finally spoken, required only space. Grady didn't offer details beyond that. He didn't describe the moment of tragedy, didn't paint a picture of circumstance. He simply stopped speaking when the words could no longer form without breaking something fragile inside him. Evan closed the folder. Procedure would follow: processing, documentation, statements, formalities, the mechanical steps of institutional justice. But none of those steps changed the reality that Lira Holleran's life had been cut short by someone who believed proximity implied permission, someone who mistook quiet kindness for invitation. Grady's shoulders slumped. "Didn't mean for things to go that way," he whispered. "It happened fast." Evan nodded once, not in agreement, not in sympathy, just in recognition that the truth had finally taken shape. Two officers entered the room quietly. They approached Grady with professionalism, guiding him to stand. He didn't resist, didn't question. He simply followed, leaving behind the still air of the room. When the door closed, Evan remained seated. He stared at the empty chair opposite him. The room felt colder now, hollow in a restrained way. He let the silence settle, giving it room to breathe. Lira's case was no longer unsolved, but the resolution carried no ceremony. He returned to his office, turning on the small desk lamp that cast a low amber glow. Papers waited for him, final reports, summaries, evidence logs, but he didn't reach for them yet. He instead looked at the photograph of Lira, recovered from the painting. Her expression, caught mid-laughter, seemed distant from the life recorded in files. She looked alive, warm, unaware of how someone misread her quiet nature. The lines of the setting sun behind her echoed the vertical strokes she later painted over and over, strokes Evan understood now as distance, boundary, protection. The truth of her final weeks had not been visible on the surface. Her art carried it in silence. Her behavior signaled it subtly. Her retreat into solitude was not eccentricity but self-preservation. Evan felt a restrained ache, subtle, controlled, as he realized how much of her voice had been interpreted as quiet rather than caution. He leaned back slightly, letting the muted hum of the precinct blend with the memory of the old crime scene. The smell of dust on abandoned floors, the weight of forgotten evidence, the faint salt carried by the draft near her hallway, all of it returned in subdued fragments. Justice, he thought, did not restore balance. It merely acknowledged what had already occurred. His mind replayed his own early steps in the original investigation, his inexperience, the speed with which he had drawn conclusions, the small details he dismissed, the evidence hidden in plain sight. He felt no self-reproach now, just a steady recognition. Sometimes truth requires time, not because it is complex, but because it hides behind assumptions shaped by routine and trust. He opened the final report and wrote the concluding line with practiced, clinical precision. Case 79H, resolved through re-examination of overlooked evidence and corroborative statements. He paused before signing. His pen hovered, as if waiting for something more human to acknowledge the weight of decades. But he wrote only his name, measured, quiet, steady. Outside his office window, night deepened over the coastal town. The boardwalk lights flickered in the distance, stretching across the shoreline where Lira once walked with her sketchbook. Waves moved in slow rhythm, indifferent to the truths discovered on land. The door to his office remained open, letting the distant murmur of the precinct drift in. An officer walked past, offering a subtle nod, routine recognition. Evan returned the gesture. Nothing in the building shifted dramatically. No celebration. No announcement. Cold cases seldom closed with spectacle. He turned off the desk lamp and gathered his coat. The photograph of Lira remained pinned to the board, illuminated faintly by the corridor light. He studied it one last time before leaving his office. Justice, he realized, was mechanical. Processes, forms, signatures, the machinery of resolution. But truth, once uncovered, carried its own quiet shape. It lingered in spaces that could not be filed away. As he stepped outside into the night, the coastal air felt crisp. The faint scent of salt drifted on the breeze, reminiscent of old scenes, old mistakes, old silences. Evan walked slowly toward his car, each step measured, as if packing through the remnants of memory. He paused before opening the door, gaze turning toward the dark horizon. The case was solved. But answers did not soften the past, they simply illuminated it. And somewhere, within the quiet of the night and the open stretch of shoreline, he felt the unresolved truth settle. Not everything visible is real. Not everything hidden is lost. Some truths sleep beneath the surface, waiting patiently for the moment they're finally seen.